Please, honey, Eleanor really needs you right now. Her condition's gotten worse. My mother's voice crackled through the phone, heavy with what I now know was fabricated concern. I slumped onto my bed in my small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, surrounded by the luggage I'd meticulously packed for our family getaway to the lakeside resort. My body ached from the 12-hour night shift I'd just finished at the hospice center, but the excitement that had kept me going suddenly deflated into worry. Of course I'll stay, I replied without hesitation, rubbing my bloodshot eyes. Grandma Eleanor needs me more than I need a vacation. The words tumbled out automatically, the same instinctive response I'd given countless times before. Those words would come back to haunt me just hours later. My name is Olivia Hayes, and I'm 32 years old. All my life I've tried to be the responsible daughter, the one who could be counted on when things got tough. Just like I care for my hospice patients, I've always tried to care for my family, putting their needs above my own. But that dedication was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. I had been looking forward to this resort vacation for months. It was supposed to be our first real family gathering in years. Me, my parents Gregory and Victoria, my younger sister Natalie, and a few other relatives. I'd spent weeks juggling my shifts at the hospice, calling in favors from colleagues, and even taking unpaid leave to make this work. I'd stretched my already tight budget to buy new summer clothes, still paying off the nursing school loans that seemed never-ending. But when Mom called about Grandma Eleanor's worsening condition, I didn't think twice about canceling everything. That evening, as I was driving to check on my grandmother, my phone chimed repeatedly. I pulled into a gas station to check the notifications. It was a group message accidentally sent to me by Natalie. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the conversation, my stomach twisting into knots. The resort is gorgeous. So glad Olivia couldn't make it, always so serious and making everyone feel guilty, read one message from my mother. Then came a photo, my entire family standing on the deck of our family's lake house, champagne glasses raised in celebration. Finally relaxing without nurse buzzkill watching everyone's health choices, my sister had written, followed by laughing emojis. Best family vacation ever. #blessed #lakehouse life. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. There they were, Mom, Dad, Natalie, my aunts and uncles, all smiling broadly in the sunshine of the resort. They had lied to me. They had deliberately excluded me from the family vacation, using my beloved grandmother as an excuse. The same grandmother whose medical appointments I'd been driving her to for years, while Natalie posted Instagram stories from boutique openings. When I finally arrived at Eleanor's modest house, my hands were still trembling as I knocked on the door. To my surprise, she opened it herself, looking tired but mostly well, certainly not in the dire condition my mother had described. Her face registered immediate concern when she saw my tear-streaked face. "Olivia, sweetheart, what's happened?" Eleanor asked, her nurse's instincts still sharp at 68. She pulled me into a warm embrace, the familiar scent of her chamomile tea bringing fresh tears to my eyes. "I thought you were at the lake house with everyone." As we sat in her well-worn living room, surrounded by the medical books that had inspired my own career, the truth came pouring out, the resort vacation, the lies, the group messages revealing how my family really saw me. I showed her the photos that had shattered my world. "I don't understand," I said, my voice breaking as I organized her pillbox automatically, a Sunday routine I never missed. "Why would they do this to me? Why lie about you being worse?" I rearranged 6 night shifts and used up my vacation days. Eleanor's face darkened with a mixture of disappointment and dawning realization. She had always treated both her granddaughters equally, but my parents were a different story. Growing up in Chicago, I had watched them consistently favor my sister. When Natalie wanted a car for college, they bought her a new one. When I needed help with nursing school tuition, I had to take out loans that I'm still paying off. Victoria called me last week, Eleanor revealed, her voice tight with controlled anger. She said you were working too hard and needed a break from taking care of me. She shook her head in disbelief. She mentioned you wouldn't go unless there was an emergency, but I had no idea they would actually tell you I was seriously ill. The resort accommodation wasn't cheap, nearly $3,000 per person for the lakeside suites. I had saved for months to afford my portion, picking up extra hospice night shifts when everyone else wanted to avoid them. Now I wondered if they had planned to exclude me all along, if my hard-earned money had somehow funded Natalie's spa treatments. You know what hurts the most? I said, organizing Eleanor's medications with the precision I'd developed caring for my patients. They didn't even need the elaborate excuse. They could have just told me they wanted a vacation without me. Instead, they used you, knowing how much I care about you and my patients, to manipulate me. Eleanor reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, the same strength I'd admired throughout my childhood. Sometimes people show you exactly who they are, even when they think they're hiding it, she said, the wisdom of her years as a head nurse evident in her voice. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? I looked up at her, seeing something fierce and determined in her eyes, the same expression she'd had when she encouraged me to pursue nursing after her own hospital stay years ago. Little did I know, Eleanor had been watching our family dynamics more closely than any of us realized, and she had plans of her own. As I sat with Eleanor in her living room, organizing her weekly medications, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a series of WhatsApp messages from my cousin Jenna, who clearly didn't know I'd been excluded from the resort vacation. She had meant to send photos to everyone in the family group chat, forgetting that I would see them too. Look at the amazing sunset from the deck. Missing you all already. #FamilyTime, Jenna had written, attaching several pictures. My heart sank deeper with each swipe through the images. There was Natalie wearing the designer sundress I had helped her choose when she complained about having nothing to wear, even though her closet was 3 times the size of mine. My parents were lounging by the infinity pool, expensive cocktails in hand. The whole family gathered for a formal dinner on the terrace, all dressed up and laughing, without me. But what made my stomach truly twist was the gleaming watch on Natalie's wrist, a Cartier that I recognized immediately from last Christmas. It had been the highlight of our family gift exchange, presented to Natalie with great ceremony while I received a store-bought photo album of memories with Grandma. She gave Natalie that $5,000 watch for Christmas, didn't she? I asked, showing Eleanor the close-up photo where Natalie was clearly showing off the timepiece. While I got a $25 photo album and a lecture about how memories are more valuable than material things. The words felt bitter on my tongue. Eleanor leaned forward, squinting at the photo, her expression hardening as she recognized the watch. That watch was purchased with the money I gave your mother specifically for both of you girls, she said quietly, her nurse's calm barely containing her anger. I wanted you to have the medical journal subscription you've been wanting, the one that would help with your hospice certification. Then Eleanor revealed something that made my already exhausted body go cold. The resort vacation hadn't been paid for with my parents' money at all. 2 months ago, she had given them $15,000 to plan a family vacation, explicitly stating it was for all of us, a celebration of my completing 5 years at the hospice center. Instead, they had used my portion to upgrade their accommodations and book exclusive spa packages for Natalie's influencer content. I've been watching, Eleanor continued, her voice heavy with disappointment as she absently rubbed her wrist where her blood pressure cuff usually sat. For years, I've seen how they treat you differently. I kept hoping they would change, that they would realize what they were doing, but this is the last straw. She stood up slowly, the arthritis in her knees making her wince slightly, and walked to the small desk where she kept her medical records. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a leather-bound journal and a thick manila envelope. I wasn't going to show you this yet, she said, returning to her seat with careful steps, "but you need to know. I've been keeping records, every time they've favored Natalie, every time they've taken advantage of your kindness, every penny they've spent differently between you two. It started as notes in my nursing journal, old habits from my days as a head nurse, documenting everything. Inside the envelope were bank statements, photographs, email printouts, and Eleanor's meticulous handwritten notes spanning years. My hands trembled as I read through them, my clinical detachment, the same one I used when delivering difficult news to patients' families, completely failing me now. There were receipts for Natalie's private university tuition, paid in full, while I was still receiving collection notices for my nursing school loans. Photos of family trips I'd never known about because I was too busy with work to be included. Email exchanges between my parents discussing how to divert funds meant for both daughters. The truth was laid bare in Eleanor's precise documentation. The pattern of favoritism wasn't just in my head or a case of sibling jealousy, it had been calculated, consistent, and deliberate. But why? I whispered, the weight of years of gaslighting crashing down around me. All the times Victoria had said, "Don't be so sensitive, Olivia," or Gregory had insisted, "We've always treated you girls the same." Why did they always make me feel like I was imagining it? Like I was the problem for even noticing? My voice cracked as I organized Eleanor's pill containers, the Sunday routine giving my shaking hands something to focus on. Eleanor reached across the coffee table, her eyes flashing with a determination I'd rarely seen, the same look she'd had decades ago when fighting for better patient care standards at her hospital. "Because that's what people do when they know they're wrong," she said, her voice firm with the authority that had guided countless young nurses. "They try to make you doubt yourself. But not anymore, Olivia. Not anymore." The family vacation was scheduled to last 7 days. As I sat in my apartment the next morning, drinking cold coffee and going through Eleanor's documentation more carefully, my phone lit up with a WhatsApp message from Natalie. "Mom says you're spreading lies about us to Grandma. Why can't you just be happy for once instead of trying to ruin everything with your drama? Some of us are trying to create positive content here." I stared at the message, watching the blue check marks appear as she saw I'd read it. Instead of the usual immediate response where I would apologize or explain myself, I let the message sit. Minutes passed as the "Natalie is typing" notification appeared and disappeared repeatedly. "I see you reading this. Don't ignore me when I'm trying to fix your issues." Rather than responding directly to Natalie, I opened our family WhatsApp group. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard as I contemplated what to write. This wasn't my usual conflict-avoidant self. Years of hospice work had taught me that life was too short for artificial peace. Interesting how being lied to about Grandma Eleanor's health so you could all vacation without me somehow makes me the problem, I wrote, attaching one of the photos Jenna had sent. Even more interesting how the resort was paid for with money Grandma gave specifically meant to include me after my 5-year work anniversary. I added a second message before anyone could respond. "I've spent years arranging my hospice shifts around family events, only to be told I'm no fun or too serious. Meanwhile, Natalie gets a Cartier watch while I get a photo album because memories are priceless." Within minutes, my phone exploded with private messages and group responses. Family friends expressed shock. Cousins began messaging me privately, sharing their own observations of how I'd been treated differently over the years. "We always wondered why you weren't in the family pictures. I thought it was strange when they bought Natalie that car but said they couldn't help with your nursing school." Then my father called. I almost didn't answer, but Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. "Stand your ground, you've done nothing wrong. Take down those messages immediately," he demanded, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone he used with his real estate clients. "You're embarrassing this family. Do you have any idea what this could do to your mother's social media presence? To my business reputation?" "No, Dad," I replied, surprising myself with my steady voice. You embarrassed this family when you lied about Grandma Eleanor being worse, when you took her money meant to celebrate my work anniversary, and used it to exclude me. That's not how it happened, he argued, his voice rising. We needed a break from your constant. My constant what, Dad? My constant caretaking? My constant juggling of hospital shifts to make family events? My constant effort to be part of this family despite how you treat me? The line went quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, lowered to something almost threatening. If you don't take down those messages and apologize privately to your mother, you'll regret it. You have no idea what's at stake here. Are you threatening me? I asked, the same calm voice I used with agitated patience settling over me. I'm warning you. Your mother and I have protected you all these years, kept certain things from you. If you want to play this game, fine, but remember, you're not the only one who can tell stories. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone. What things had they protected me from? What stories could they possibly tell? I called Eleanor immediately. They're trying to scare me, I told her, pacing my small apartment. Dad says they've been protecting me from something but won't say what. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear her breathing change, the slight wheeze that always concerned me as a healthcare professional. Check your email, she finally said. I'm sending you something right now. It's time you knew everything. As I opened my laptop, my hands trembling slightly, I realized this was bigger than just a family vacation. Whatever was in that email would change everything, and judging by Eleanor's tone, my parents had good reason to be worried about what I might discover. My hands shook as I opened Eleanor's email. Inside was a scan of a document dated 25 years ago, a trust agreement with my grandfather's signature that made my breath catch in my throat. According to the paperwork, my maternal grandfather, a dedicated doctor who had made significant investments in medical technology, had left behind a special educational trust before he passed away. It was specifically created to fund medical education for any grandchild who chose to follow in his healthcare footsteps. The trust was worth over $500,000 and had grown substantially over the years. But there was more. A series of bank statements showed regular withdrawals from the trust, money that had been used to fund Natalie's business degree, her private university tuition, her semester abroad, and even portions of her Instagram-perfect wedding. All of it had been taken from what was supposed to be my medical education fund, money that should have covered my nursing school and specialized hospice certification. They've been stealing from you since you chose nursing school, Eleanor explained, her voice carrying the precise clarity she developed during decades as a head nurse. Victoria convinced the trustee, my brother Walter, to redirect your educational funds, claiming you'd decided against medical school. But as you can see from these records, they spent it all on Natalie and her influencer career aspirations. I stared at the screen, my voice barely audible when I finally managed to speak. All those extra night shifts, all those double shifts on holidays when no one else wanted to work. The numbers were staggering. Over $200,000 had been siphoned from my medical education trust while I'd worked myself to exhaustion to pay off student loans for my nursing degree. Just then, another email notification appeared in my inbox. This time from Uncle Walter. I opened it with shaking hands. Olivia, I can't keep quiet anymore. What they did with the vacation money was the last straw. I've attached documentation of every withdrawal they made from your grandfather's medical education trust. I'm so sorry, I should have stopped them years ago. The alcohol and my own weakness made me an easy target for Victoria's manipulation. The attached files revealed an even darker truth. My parents hadn't just spent my trust fund on Natalie, they'd been systematically hiding their mounting debt by diverting my grandfather's legacy. Their real estate business had been struggling for years, staying afloat only through creative accounting and the siphoning of trust funds. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked Eleanor, my hospice-trained composure finally breaking as I struggled to process the magnitude of the betrayal. "I only discovered the full extent recently," she replied, medical pragmatism in her tone. When I confronted Victoria last month about the Christmas gifts disparity, she swore they'd make it right. That's when I gave them the vacation money with explicit instructions it was to celebrate your 5 years at the hospice. It was a test, Olivia. I wanted to see if they'd finally do the right thing, and they failed spectacularly. I took a deep breath, the same measured breathing I taught my terminal patients when discussing difficult options. "At least now we know the truth," I said, surprising myself with my calm. "Yes," Eleanor replied, "but more importantly, their failure has given us what we need, evidence. Walter has agreed to come clean about his role in the trust manipulation. Combined with my documentation and this vacation incident, we have a clear picture of what's happened." I felt a strange calm replacing my initial shock, the same focused clarity that came during medical emergencies at the hospice. "I need time to process this," I said. "There's more," Eleanor said, and I could hear the quiet determination in her voice, the same tone she must have used decades ago when advocating for her patients. "Check the second attachment in my email." I clicked it open and had to sit down. It was Eleanor's advance medical directive and power of attorney documents, recently updated. She had named me as her healthcare proxy and financial power of attorney, trusting me with both her medical decisions and the management of her assets, which, I now learned, included partial ownership in my father's struggling real estate company. "They're about to discover," Eleanor said firmly, "that their actions have consequences, not legal ones necessarily, but something perhaps more meaningful, the truth." The next morning, I met with Uncle Walter at a quiet coffee shop near my apartment. The dark circles under his eyes and slight tremor in his hands told me more about his struggle with alcohol than his words ever could. A retired lawyer whose career had been cut short by addiction, Walter handed me a leather portfolio with unsteady fingers. "These are copies of every document, every transaction," he said quietly, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I've been keeping records all along, maybe out of guilt, maybe knowing this day would come. Your parents are going to be furious, Olivia. They've been calling me non-stop since I told them I was meeting you." "What are they saying?" I asked, flipping through the meticulously organized evidence of years of financial manipulation. "They're claiming it was all done to protect you," he said, finally looking up. "That you were too caring, too giving, that you would have just given the money away to patients or coworkers in need." He shook his head, disgust momentarily overcoming his shame. "But I found something else, something they don't know I discovered." He pulled out another document, this one showing a series of recent refinancing applications and transfer requests. "They're planning to declare bankruptcy, Olivia. They've been moving assets into Natalie's name, preparing to claim insolvency while preserving their lifestyle. The vacation wasn't just a getaway, it was preparation. They were testing whether they could maintain appearances while secretly dismantling their financial house of cards." My medical training kept my expression neutral, but I felt a coldness spreading through me. "They're planning to lose everything while secretly keeping it all?" "Yes, and Natalie's fully involved. She's been setting up accounts for her influencer business that are really just shells to hide family assets." Just then, my phone buzzed with a WhatsApp notification. It was a voice message from Natalie. "I know Walter's talking to you right now. You've always been jealous of me, always playing the martyr with your important work while making everyone feel guilty for having fun. Well, guess what? By the time you figure everything out, it'll be too late. Mom and Dad have a plan, and your little nursing salary won't save them or you." I played the message for Walter, whose face grew even paler. "They're moving faster than I thought," he said, pulling out his own phone. "We need to contact them now, before this gets worse." I called Eleanor immediately. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Victoria just called me in tears," she said without preamble. "Gregory's threatening to liquidate everything and move them to Arizona. Says he can't face the shame of bankruptcy here. Can you talk them down? I asked, gathering my things. Better. I've already called their bank and the real estate company's board. As partial owner, I've temporarily frozen major asset transfers pending a family discussion. But Olivia, she paused, her voice softening, you need to come with me to talk to them. They need to hear from both of us. The medical power of attorney documents were filed yesterday. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. They don't know about that yet, do they? No, and that gives us time to approach this compassionately. Walter's documentation proves what happened, but this isn't about punishment. It's about healing a very broken family dynamic. As I gathered my things, another WhatsApp message chimed, this time from my mother, you ungrateful child. After everything we've sacrificed for you, you'll regret this. But for the first time in my life, their emotional manipulation didn't pierce through me. I had truth on my side, and perhaps more importantly, I had nothing left to lose. My mind was surprisingly calm as I drove to my parents' house, the same focused clarity I felt when caring for patients in their final hours. Eleanor had suggested meeting there rather than at the company offices, believing a family matter should be handled in a family space. I arrived at my parents' sprawling suburban home just as they were loading suitcases into their Mercedes. Natalie was with them, frantically texting on her phone while occasionally glancing up nervously. They all froze when they saw my car pull into the driveway. "What are you doing here?" my father demanded, attempting to maintain his authoritative demeanor, but I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. "I was about to ask you the same thing," I replied with the same quiet composure I used when explaining difficult medical realities to families. "Especially since you appear to be leaving town when we have serious family matters to discuss." "Family matters?" Natalie scoffed, though her voice wavered slightly. "Since when do you care about family? You're always too busy with your dying patients to bother with us." I didn't rise to her bait. Instead, I held up my phone, displaying the medical power of attorney documents. "Eleanor has entrusted me with her healthcare decisions and financial oversight of her assets, including her stake in Dad's real estate company. As her representative, I think we need to discuss the trust fund my grandfather set up for medical education that was diverted to Natalie's influencer career." My mother's face drained of color. Behind me, Walter's car pulled into the driveway, followed by Eleanor in her modest sedan. "You don't understand," my mother pleaded, her perfectly manicured hand clutching at her designer blouse. "Everything we did was for this family's image. You were always so ordinary with your practical career and sensible choices. We needed Natalie to elevate us." "No," I corrected her gently but firmly, using the same tone I used when redirecting confused hospice patients. "What you did was steal from me to create an illusion of wealth for Natalie, and now you were planning to declare bankruptcy while hiding assets. That's not protecting the family, that's fraud." I turned to my sister, seeing fear replace her usual contempt. "Was the resort vacation worth it, Natalie? Was pretending to be wealthy on Instagram worth destroying our family?" Eleanor and Walter approached as Natalie's composure finally crumbled. My father tried to guide her back toward the house, but the confrontation he'd avoided for decades had finally arrived. "Let's take this inside," Eleanor suggested firmly. "This family has spent enough time hiding the truth. It's time we all sit down and face it together." 3 months later, I sat in Eleanor's garden on a crisp autumn morning, organizing her weekly medications while we shared tea. The past months had revealed even more than we'd suspected. My parents' real estate business had been struggling for years, kept afloat by increasingly desperate financial maneuvers and diverted trust funds. They weren't facing criminal charges. Eleanor had decided against pursuing legal action, but the consequences had been significant nonetheless. The truth had forced my father to restructure his business completely, with transparent financial practices now overseen by a board that included Eleanor. My mother had retreated from social media, her carefully curated image impossible to maintain in the face of financial reality. Natalie had moved to Minneapolis, finally forced to support herself without our parents' financial backing. Her influencer career had transformed into a more authentic version focused on financial transparency and rebuilding after family trauma. Her last message to me had been a lengthy, tearful voice note of apology, but some wounds run too deep for words alone to heal. "You know," Eleanor said, sipping her tea while watching a chickadee at her bird feeder, "your grandfather would be proud of how you handled everything. He always said caring for others reveals people's true characters far more than money ever could." I nodded, thinking of the changes I'd helped implement at the hospice center using a portion of the recovered trust funds. We'd established a scholarship program for nursing assistants wanting to advance their education and created a more supportive environment for both patients and staff. "I never wanted any of this," I admitted, adjusting Eleanor's blood pressure cuff. "I just wanted to be treated as worthwhile. To matter as much as Natalie did." Eleanor reached over and squeezed my hand, her nurse's eyes assessing me with the same care I showed my patients. "Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its greatest challenges. You've turned their betrayal into something healing, not just for yourself, but for them too." She was right. Through this painful process, I had found my voice, my boundaries, and most importantly, my self-worth. That resort vacation they took without me, it hadn't been the getaway of a lifetime after all. It had been the beginning of truth-telling, and the start of a more authentic life for all of us. Epilogue. Last week, Natalie visited Eleanor for the first time without our parents. I was there too, our first time alone together in years. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually eased as we helped Eleanor with her garden and medication routine together. "I never understood why they favored me," Natalie admitted as we washed dishes side by side. "But I see it clearly now. They saw you as strong enough to handle their neglect, while they thought I needed their constant support." "It wasn't fair to either of us," I replied, passing her a plate to dry. "They underestimated you and exploited me." Eleanor watched us from the kitchen table, a smile playing at her lips as she saw her granddaughters finding their way back to each other, not through expensive gestures or social media moments, but through the simple act of caring for her and each other. As Natalie and I walked to our cars that evening, she hesitated before opening her door. "I'm sorry I was such a terrible sister," she said quietly. "I don't know if we can ever be close, but I'd like to try." I thought about all the patients I'd cared for who never got the chance to reconcile with family. "Life's too short to refuse second chances," I said finally. "We can start small." That night, I received a WhatsApp message from Natalie, not a glossy, filtered photo, but a simple text, "Thank you for today. Same time next week?" It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning.